My name's Landon. I'm 33, and for as long as I can remember, my cousin Brett has treated our relationship like some kind of lifelong competition, the kind no one else agreed to join. We're only 9 months apart in age, raised more like brothers than cousins. Our mothers are twin sisters who bought houses 3 doors down from each other in a beachside suburb of Southern California. Growing up, we did everything together: summer camps, little league, even shared birthday parties. But somewhere along the way, Brett decided that everything I did had to be a challenge. If I got a bike, he got a better one. If I made the honor roll, he suddenly found his academic drive. When I got into UCLA, he applied to Stanford just so he could brag that he aimed higher. Spoiler alert, he didn't get in. For a while, I let it go. I'm not naturally competitive. I'm the quiet type, more about making moves in silence than chasing validation. I got my degree in architecture, landed a decent job, and spent most of my 20s designing homes up and down the coast, while saving every spare dollar I could. I never made a big deal of my work. I just kept my head down and built a life. Brett, meanwhile, bounced around from one big idea to the next. First it was a dropshipping business, then a podcast, then flipping NFTs. He always had some new hustle that would change everything, and it usually came with Instagram posts about grinding and the hustle never sleeps, while borrowing money from his dad to stay afloat. Still, our paths didn't cross much in our adult years, at least not in any meaningful way, until our grandmother passed away. That's when the family dynamic started to shift. Gran had left behind a modest inheritance, nothing crazy, but enough to make people weird. My share wasn't huge, but combined with what I'd saved over the years, it gave me just enough to finally chase the one dream I'd been quietly working toward: owning a home on the cliffs just north of the beach town we grew up in. I'd spent years walking those bluffs, sketching homes that fit into the rugged terrain like they'd grown there. I knew the zoning laws, the land use regulations, even the lot numbers. And then, like fate had finally nodded in my direction, the perfect property came up for auction, a mid-century fixer-upper sitting on a double lot, with a direct line of sight to the ocean and a little stretch of private path that wound down to the water. The auction was quiet, low-key, mostly contractors and a few out-of-town investors. I was confident going in. I had my limit, my paperwork in order, and a pre-approved mortgage ready to go. But then, 15 minutes before bidding started, I saw him. Brett. Hair slicked back, expensive sunglasses he didn't need, and that arrogant, lopsided smirk he always wore when he thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He spotted me across the crowd, walked right up, and said, "Didn't expect to see you here, cousin. Thought this place was a little out of your league." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I just nodded, turned back to my paperwork, and tried to ignore the familiar pit in my stomach, the one that always formed when Brett turned something personal into a public game. The auction began, and sure enough, Brett jumped in almost immediately. Not just with bids, with smug little comments too. "Oh, you're still in it. Didn't peg you for a Cliffs guy? You sure you've got the budget for this one, Landon?" Every time I raised my hand, he raised his right after. It was obvious he didn't even want the house. He just didn't want me to have it. The other bidders started to back off. It became clear this wasn't a normal auction anymore. It was a grudge match. I held my line. I wasn't about to blow my entire savings trying to one-up a man-child with a superiority complex and no plan. When the bidding crossed my ceiling, I let it go. Brett got the property, laughing as he signed the papers. "Don't worry," he told me on the way out. "Maybe I'll let you mow the lawn." That night, I sat on the beach, just down from the cliff he'd now call home. It should have hurt more, losing the house I'd wanted for years, but strangely, it didn't. Because as I sat there watching the sunset spill gold across the water, I noticed something. The empty lot next door. Smaller, undeveloped, and not nearly as flashy. But it had something the other didn't: elevation. Just enough slope to rise above Brett's new prize. And just like that, a different kind of plan began forming in my head. One that didn't involve winning an auction, but something far more satisfying. I went home, opened my laptop, and started digging. If Brett wanted a game, he was finally going to get one. Only this time, I was playing by my own rules. It didn't take long for Brett to make himself known in the neighborhood. A week after the auction, his social media was flooded with posts about securing the bag and manifesting your dream home, each one tagged with inspirational captions and the GPS coordinates of the property, subtle as a brick through a window. He posed shirtless on the front porch during demo day, holding a sledgehammer like he'd earned the house with grit and sweat instead of petty spite and deep pockets from his dad. I tried to ignore it. Really, I did. I told myself I'd dodged a bullet, that the house needed way more work than Brett realized, that he'd get bored and sell it off like every other project he'd flaked on. But something about the smugness of his victory kept gnawing at me, like a splinter I couldn't reach. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly doing my homework. The lot next door wasn't on the market yet, but the owner, a retired couple in their late 70s, had moved out of state last year to be closer to their grandkids. The place was empty, overgrown, but still structurally sound. I remembered it from my site visits. It had a different zoning classification, slightly more restrictive, but still viable. I called their real estate agent, left a message, and waited. A few days later, I got a call back. They weren't planning to list publicly yet, but they were open to a private offer. The price was high, not outrageous, but high enough that I had to make some moves. I talked to my bank, leaned on a few contacts, and got pre-approval in motion. It would be tight, tighter than I liked, but doable. And best of all, it was completely under Brett's radar. While the paperwork moved, I kept my distance. I didn't need to poke the bear. Brett, however, seemed determined to flaunt his win. He started inviting family members over for progress walkthroughs, like he was hosting a reality show. My aunt posted a photo of Brett holding up a glass of champagne in the gutted living room with the caption, "My brilliant boy making power moves." That stung a little. Not because I needed validation, but because I'd spent years building my career quietly, professionally. And somehow, this clown was the family golden boy because he played real-life Monopoly. Then came the phone call from my mother. She was trying to play peacemaker, asking if I'd congratulate Brett and let bygones be bygones. "Landon," she said gently, "he didn't really mean to spite you. He probably just got caught up in the moment." "Mom, he mocked me during the auction. In front of strangers." "Well, he does have a dramatic streak. But he's still family." I didn't argue. There was no point. I just told her I was happy for him and changed the subject. Inside, though, something started to shift. The tipping point came 2 weeks later. I was at a quiet diner near the bluff, reviewing the final documents for my lot purchase when I heard familiar laughter behind me. I turned, and sure enough, Brett walked in with 2 of his friends, guys I recognized from high school, the kind who peaked early and still wore Letterman jackets in their 30s. They didn't see me at first, which gave me a front row seat to their conversation. "No, seriously," Brett was saying. "I only bid 'cause I saw Landon sweating bullets. I mean, come on, the guy's been sketching that house since we were 15. I had to do it." One of the guys asked, "You even gonna live there?" Brett shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe I flip it just to prove a point. Honestly, I don't care. I just like watching him lose. He always acts so humble, like he's better than everyone. It's fake." I froze. It wasn't just the gloating. It was the venom. The way he twisted my quiet personality into some sort of attack. Like I was arrogant for not chasing attention. I waited until they were seated, then paid my check and left. But something inside me had changed. The lot next door wasn't just a backup plan anymore. It was a mission. A week later, the sale closed. The lot was mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not my friends, not even my business partner. I wanted to keep it quiet, at least for now. I filed the deed under a holding company I'd set up years ago for a side project. Nothing fancy, just a generic name that wouldn't raise red flags. Brett didn't notice. But the universe has a funny way of pressing on wounds. Our grandmother's birthday rolled around mid-spring, and the family hosted a memorial brunch in her honor. It was supposed to be casual, just a few photos, some food, and stories about Gran. She was the glue of our family. Even Brett, for all his drama, softened around her memory. I hadn't seen him since the auction, and part of me hoped we could just nod at each other and move on. No such luck. The brunch was held at our aunt's house, just 2 blocks from the ocean. I arrived early, helped set up, and tried to keep my head down. Brett showed up fashionably late, in a tailored linen shirt and loafers with no socks. The kind of look that screams, "Trust fund yacht dad." He made the rounds like a politician, hugging people, making jokes, telling stories like he was the main character. Eventually, he cornered me near the buffet table. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Almost." I looked up from my plate. "Hey, Brett." He grinned. "You still dreaming about that house?" "I've got the demo almost finished." Thinking of putting in a rooftop deck, maybe a hot tub. Gotta make the most of the ocean view, right? He leaned in slightly, like he wanted the next words to sting. Shame you weren't ready to compete. Maybe next time, huh? I smiled politely. Yeah, maybe next time. He walked off, pleased with himself, but I could feel the rage simmering under my skin. It wasn't just the jab, it was the performance. The need to rub it in front of everyone, like I was the charity case and he was the prodigy. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that my design plans were already in motion. I spent the next few weeks meeting with engineers, surveyors, and contractors. I wasn't building a house. Not yet. I didn't need to. All I needed was one structure, a privacy fence. A legal one, perfectly within code, but tall enough and positioned precisely enough to block a very specific line of sight. Brett's. I learned every angle of his lot, where the master bedroom window faced, where the future rooftop deck would sit, how the elevation of my lot intersected with his. It was like playing chess in 3 dimensions, and I didn't rush it. Every permit was filed quietly, every material sourced discreetly. The fence wouldn't just block a view, it would be a wall, a quiet, undeniable message. But before I broke ground, something else happened, something that made everything personal on a whole new level. My mother invited me to dinner, just the two of us. We were sitting on her porch, drinking tea, when she casually mentioned that Brett had been showing off the house plans again, that he was planning a big housewarming party once it was done. I nodded politely. Then she hesitated. Landon, I know you were upset, but Brett told us he only bid because he assumed you'd already dropped out. He didn't mean anything by it. I raised an eyebrow. He told you that? She nodded. He said he even offered to let you buy it off him, but you turned it down. I stared at her, stunned. Mom, he never said that. She looked uncomfortable. Well, he implied. I cut her off gently. Brett lies, Mom. He lied to you. The conversation soured quickly after that. She defended him, of course. Said I was too sensitive. That I held grudges. That family doesn't keep score. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. Brett had manipulated the narrative, twisted the story, made himself the generous victor and me the bitter loser. And people believed him. Even the ones who should have known better. It wasn't the property I'd lost. It was my reputation within the family. And that was the betrayal I couldn't forget. So I went home, and I finalized every blueprint, every permit, every delivery schedule for that fence. I made sure it complied with every code, followed every setback law, and still accomplished exactly what I wanted. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the first move. I didn't speak to anyone in the family for a while after that dinner. I wasn't angry, not in the way people assume, not shouting, slamming doors, or posting cryptic Facebook updates. No, mine was a quieter kind of betrayal, the kind that doesn't scream, but simmers just beneath the surface. It was the silence that comes when you realize you've been painted as the villain in a story you didn't even know was being written. That your own mother thought you were petty for not applauding the person who humiliated you publicly, then lied about it later. I didn't cut people off. I just stepped back. The days passed slower after that. I'd go to work, clock in, meet clients, review blueprints, design homes for strangers while my own dreams sat smudged and unfinished on a mental sketchpad I no longer felt like opening. The lot next to Brett's remained undeveloped for months. I wasn't in a rush anymore. What once felt like momentum now felt like inertia. I'd done the smart thing, the patient thing. I'd played the long game. But sitting alone in my small rental apartment, staring at my plans in the dim light of my desk lamp, I couldn't help but feel like I'd still lost. Brett's house, meanwhile, came together with the speed of a show home build. His father's connections helped. He used family money for the best materials, flashy finishes, and an over-the-top rooftop deck complete with glass railing and recessed lighting. All aimed, of course, at maximizing that ocean view. He even posted a time-lapse video of the whole construction process, turning a dream into reality. The caption read, "More hashtags, more praise." The comments poured in. Extended family, old friends, even mutual acquaintances who barely knew him, all congratulating him on his vision. I stayed off social media for a while after that. But if I'm being honest, the hardest part wasn't Brett. It was the loneliness. The isolation that crept in after years of working in silence, of prioritizing stability over spectacle. You get so used to keeping your head down that one day you look up and realize everyone else has moved on without you. That they took your quiet nature as absence. That they believed the louder voice by default, simply because it was louder. I started second-guessing everything. Was I too cautious? Too quiet? Had I made myself invisible? And then came the worst moment of all. The real bottom. It was the night of Brett's housewarming party. I hadn't been invited. No surprise there. But most of the family had. My mother, my aunt, even my younger sister, who texted me mid-evening. Are you really not coming? It's actually really fun. The view is insane. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove out to the coast. Not to spy. Not to be petty. Just to remember. I parked along the overlooked trail, a public path I'd walked 1,000 times before, and climbed up to the old vantage point. From there, I could see both lots, Brett's, now lit up like a celebrity compound, and mine, still empty, still quiet. Its outlines only visible if you knew what you were looking for. The laughter carried on the wind. Music, clinking glasses, people dancing on that glass-railed deck. And for a moment, I truly wondered if I was the fool. If all my planning, my silent revenge, my dignity, if any of it mattered. That night, I drove home and seriously considered selling the lot. The market was good. I'd make a decent profit. I could move on, start over. Maybe even leave the coast entirely. But I didn't. Instead, the next morning, I woke up at dawn, walked to my desk, opened my sketchpad, and redrew the plans from scratch. Not for a house, not even for a fence, but for a sanctuary. If I was going to stay, I needed something more than revenge. I needed peace. I needed a space that was mine, not in reaction to Brett, not to outdo anyone, but just mine. So I shifted the design. I pulled back the southern edge, carved out a stone meditation area with a cascading water feature and native plants that wouldn't block the view, but would soften the edge. I added a library loft, just big enough for a reading nook with a west-facing window. I brought in the best acoustic engineer I could find and asked them to help me design a space so quiet you could hear the tide change. I told no one, but I started to come back to life. Work picked up again. I took on a new client, a young couple who wanted their dream home built up in Big Sur, and they gave me full creative freedom. It was the kind of project that reminded me why I loved architecture in the first place. Not just the lines and angles, but the feeling, the emotional blueprint that lived under every wall. With the new commission came new confidence. And with that confidence, a kind of emotional distance from Brett's nonsense. His bragging started to feel more hollow, like noise in the background of a much better song I'd forgotten I was writing. The turning point came in early fall. I was sitting at a small coffee shop in town when I overheard a conversation between two women at the next table. They were talking about Brett's house. Yeah, it's gorgeous, one said. But it's just so loud. Everything's shiny. And the deck's beautiful. But I heard it overlooks a construction site now. The other woman laughed. Oh, that? Yeah. Some architect bought the lot next door. No one knows what he's building yet. But apparently it's going to be private. Real private. I sipped my coffee, smiled, and went back to sketching. Because by then, the permits were approved. And the materials were ordered. And the fence, my fence, was no longer just a wall. It was the first line of a new home. One built not out of spite, but intention. The world still thought I was licking my wounds. But quietly, brick by brick, I was rebuilding something far stronger. And when Brett finally realized what I'd done, well, let's just say the view was about to change. Construction began 3 days after my 30th birthday. No big celebration, no balloons, no social media announcements. Just the soft rumble of excavation equipment rolling onto the lot, and the first hum of progress in the form of foundation stakes being driven into the soil. I stood on the edge of the site that morning, coffee in hand, watching as the crew began marking off the first trench lines for the footings. A warm breeze drifted up from the coast, carrying with it the scent of salt water and a promise. The lot I bought was narrow but elevated, and my design took full advantage of that. A minimalist, coastal modern structure with clean lines, natural wood accents, and high privacy walls where it counted. But the real gem was the western slope, where my fence, perfectly legal and perfectly positioned, would eventually rise just high enough to obscure the view from Brett's brand new rooftop deck. Not entirely. That would have been too obvious. Too easy to challenge. No, I had a better idea. One that would frustrate him not with a wall, but with a carefully orchestrated interruption of his illusion of supremacy. Instead of building the fence straight across, I designed it with staggered wooden panels, architectural fins that alternated in height, spaced artistically, and aligned at a calculated angle. It was modern, chic, the kind of thing you'd find in an elite design magazine. But functionally, it sliced his panoramic ocean view into awkward, broken segments, jagged slats of sky and water interrupted by warm cedar blades and ornamental bamboo. He'd still technically have a view, just not one worth bragging about. And I wasn't done. See, I'd spent the last few months learning things about zoning, about city ordinances, about sound dispersion and property line rights. I studied how shadows fell during the late afternoon sun. I mapped out how landscaping could redirect sight lines without being classified as an obstruction. I hired the best lighting designer I could afford and gave them a strange, but very specific brief. I wanted the softest, warmest low-voltage garden lighting that would subtly bounce light upward at night, just enough to glow on the side of Brett's house, without breaking any codes. Make it look unintentional, I told the designer. Just a little, ambient. And slowly, I gathered my allies. Not co-conspirators, no one who even knew the full scope, but professionals who trusted my vision. My contractor, Miguel, was an old friend from college, one of the most precise builders I knew. He never asked why the fence panels were angled the way they were. He just made sure they were installed within a millimeter of the blueprint. My landscape architect, Janine, had an eye for blending native vegetation with purposeful intention. I told her I wanted natural privacy. She gave me an outdoor garden that could have doubled as a monastery courtyard. Thick, soft reeds, eucalyptus screens, strategically placed boulders. And my lighting expert, Adi, treated the outdoor space like a canvas. Every glow, every reflection, every beam. It was all orchestrated to say one thing. This space is mine. Brett, of course, noticed the construction eventually. I could feel it happen before I even saw him. The quiet shift in energy. The first time I caught him standing at the edge of his deck, arms crossed, watching as my framing crew hoisted the first long beam into place. He didn't wave. Neither did I. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. Brett says you're building something right next to his house. He sounded concerned. Concerned about what? I asked flatly. She hesitated. He says it's intrusive. I almost laughed. Intrusive. You know how he gets. He's just saying it blocks some of his light. Or the view. Or maybe it's too tall. It's within code, I replied calmly. Permits approved. Everything's legal. She didn't push further, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. And that's when I realized Brett was starting to lose control of the narrative. For once, he couldn't outmuscle me with money or charm. He couldn't spin this into some cute family rivalry. Because I wasn't playing that game anymore. I wasn't reacting. I was moving with intent. But that didn't stop him from trying. He showed up on my lot the following week. Uninvited. I was walking the site with Miguel, discussing roof overhangs and solar panel placements when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, look who's back in the game. I turned. Brett stood at the edge of the gravel path, arms spread like he was greeting an old friend. He wore aviator sunglasses and a Patagonia vest over a crisp white tee, the kind of outfit that screamed, I watched a TED Talk about leadership once. I didn't smile. Morning, I said curtly. Miguel gave me a look and quietly stepped away, leaving us alone. Brett walked forward, surveying the skeletal frame of my house. Didn't think you'd actually build on this lot, he said, gesturing around. Not a ton of space. Kind of boxed in, don't you think? I stayed silent. He cleared his throat. I mean, no offense, but it's not exactly ideal for a cliff property. Especially with my deck right there. Not much of a view left, huh? I tilted my head slightly. I'm not building for the view. He blinked. Then what are you building for? I met his eyes. Peace. That threw him off. Just for a second. His smirk twitched. Right. Well, I guess everyone has their priorities. Then, as if remembering why he came, he straightened. Look, I'll cut to the chase. I've been talking to a friend on the planning board. He says you're putting up some kind of segmented fence. I nodded. Is that really necessary? He asked. I mean, you and I. Sure, we've had our differences, but we're family. Don't you think a regular fence would be enough? I let the silence stretch. You mean the kind that doesn't block your deck? I asked finally. He shifted. I'm just saying, maybe we don't escalate. I've got investors looking at my property. Long-term plans. I'd hate for that to get complicated. There it was. The real reason. Not concern. Not sentiment. Just his wallet. His image. I gave him a small, tired smile. Then maybe you shouldn't have made this personal. He didn't reply. Just turned and walked away. That was the last conversation we had. But it wasn't the end of the setup. No, because the next step wasn't about him. It was about completing the space. The one I designed from the ground up, not just to exist beside him, but beyond him. The one that would serve as living proof that dignity could be louder than ego. That the quiet one sometimes wins, not by shouting, but by building something worth looking at. By early winter, the exterior was complete. The fencing panels rose like sculptures, staggered and sleek, casting long shadows across Brett's deck every afternoon just before sunset. The landscape glowed softly in the evenings, and my meditation garden took shape beneath a canopy of eucalyptus and coastal pine. There was no sign, no announcement, just a quiet, powerful presence where there had once been an empty lot. And then, the final move, the appraisal. A few weeks later, I requested a market valuation of my property through a private firm, not for selling, but for documentation. I'd made improvements, added equity, and the new appraisal came back significantly higher than Brett's, thanks to the rising market and my design choices. It was quiet, private, but word got around. A month later, Brett put his house on the market. He claimed it was time for a new venture, that he never intended to settle down here anyway. But I knew the truth. Because for the first time in his life, he couldn't win. Not with money. Not with charm. Not even with proximity. Because I hadn't just blocked his view. I'd built my own. And I wasn't done yet. By the time Brett officially listed his house, his tone had completely shifted. Gone were the Instagram stories flaunting sunset views and rooftop champagne. Gone were the brunch photos with captions like "manifesting greatness" or "hustle meets horizon." Instead, his social feed went quiet. His realtor, a flashy, overconfident guy I'd seen around town, put up a listing that emphasized the modern architecture and recent upgrades, but conveniently skipped over the fact that the ocean view was no longer what it used to be. And how could it be? From the edge of his rooftop deck, the same deck he once bragged about to everyone in our family, you could now see elegant vertical fins made of reclaimed cedar, carved like pieces of art, cutting the horizon into vertical strips. It wasn't just a fence. It was a statement, a sculptural privacy piece that looked intentional, legal, and expensive. And it was. Every element had been placed with surgical precision to interrupt one thing, his experience of superiority. At first, I thought that would be enough. I didn't need him to grovel. I didn't need an apology. I thought, this is it. He'll leave, sell the house at a loss, move on to his next hustle, and I'll enjoy the silence of my new sanctuary. But Brett didn't leave. Not right away. Because the market wasn't cooperating. For all his bravado, Brett had over-leveraged himself. He poured too much into renovations, assuming a quick flip. But the high-end buyers? They noticed the fencing, the lighting, the way the lot next door seemed more desirable, more modern, more purposeful. Several walked through my property while house hunting and skipped his entirely. I heard this through Miguel, who was now taking on other projects in the area, and overheard more than one couple say, "We'd rather wait and see what the house next door does." I never listed my house. I never planned to. But Brett's dream sale quietly withered. Weeks passed, then months. He started reaching out. It began with a casual text. "Brett, hey man, meant to say, your place looks amazing. Super impressed. We should grab a beer sometime and catch up." I didn't respond. A few days later, another text. "Brett, quick cue. Any chance you'd consider, buying me out? I'm thinking about other opportunities and figured it'd be cleaner to sell to someone local. You'd be my first pick, obviously." Still, I didn't respond. And that silence? That's what broke him. Because Brett needed to win publicly. He needed the narrative, the performance. And I was denying him that. There was no audience for him to show off to anymore. Just a neighbor who wouldn't play his game. Then, the phone call came. A number I recognized but hadn't saved. His father. My uncle. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was calm but strained. "Landon, listen. I know things have been tense. But Brett's in a bit of a bind. He's under pressure to sell and hasn't had luck. If there's anything you can do to help facilitate something fair, I think it'd go a long way for the family." He paused, then added, "And your mother mentioned you're doing quite well now. Everyone's proud." I played that message twice, not out of malice, but for closure. Because for the first time in years, I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I was the revenge. Quietly, respectfully, I had taken everything he wanted and made it irrelevant. Not by attacking him, but by outgrowing the game. By building something real while he built an image. But still, I wasn't done. Because Brett had made this personal. And while I'd never wanted a war, I was ready to end it. So I called him. Short and to the point. "Hey," I said. He sounded relieved. "Landon, man, thank you for calling back." I was starting to think. "I'll make you an offer," I said. "But not for your asking price." Silence. "I've reviewed your listing," I continued. "You've been sitting on the market for 4 months. You've dropped your price twice. Your deck faces a privacy feature. The view's compromised. You've maxed out on zoning, and I know for a fact your financing was structured assuming a full ROI within 6 months." Another pause. "I'll offer 20% below market," I said, "and I want the furniture included." He tried to protest, tried to pull the "but it's a premium property" line. I didn't argue. I just said, "This is a clean deal. Cash. No agents. Close in 2 weeks." He stalled for 2 more days, trying to bluff. But I knew the numbers. I knew his leverage had evaporated. So when he finally called back, voice small, humbled, I met him at a local notary's office and signed the paperwork. Just like that, the house was mine. The same house he fought to take from me. The one he paraded in front of the family, declared his victory, mocked me for losing. And now? Now it belonged to the quiet cousin. And here's the thing I never told him. I didn't want the house anymore. I didn't need it. But owning it meant it would never be his again. It meant I could repurpose it. So I walked through that house one final time. Room by room. All the showy fixtures. The oversized wine fridge. The rooftop deck that no longer saw the ocean. And then I called a friend, Ava, a local nonprofit director I'd worked with on a community design project the year before. "I've got something for you," I said. "Ever thought about turning a luxury house into a creative retreat space? For artists, architects, people who need time away to work on something real?" She said yes. And a month later, Brett's dream home reopened its doors, not as a monument to his ego, but as a sanctuary for people doing meaningful work. I funded the renovations anonymously. I let Ava take full credit. As for me, I lived next door in the house I built. My house. The one that started as a silent rebellion and ended as a place of peace. I didn't brag. I didn't post. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and the wind rustled the tall grass along the bluff, I stood on my deck with a cup of tea and watched as a young artist carried her sketchpad up the path to Brett's old rooftop. She looked out across the horizon, smiling softly, taking in the fragmented strips of sea and sky. And I smiled too, because I hadn't just reclaimed my dream. I'd redefined it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt free. Some fences are built to keep people out, but the best ones are built to keep peace in.